like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to thank all the panelists, Redos, Dr. Hart, that beacon of excitement that you are to this conversation. But what's interesting is that even though my colleague speaks in a reserved manner, the things that he writes about and the things that he say jump out of the page. When we talk about transformative justice, when we talk about criminalizing people, I know that we use certain language to talk about it. We use the word offender a lot instead of calling a person an actual human being. And I feel like my prison experience, my experience on parole, has taught me something else, that we need to amend that term. It's not just offender. It's offender who doesn't have millions of dollars to get himself off the case, because when he does, he's not an offender anymore. The whole mold and idea that they came to the inner city with when I was a child of, oh, we need to catch all the little fish so we can get the big fish. Well, here's the problem. The big fish has that $10 million attorney, and all the little fish make less money than the guy working at McDonald's. Unfortunately, what this creates is a case where people think that they want to reintroduce the youth into society. Now, that term is completely useless, of reintroducing someone into society, because how can you reintroduce an individual into society that's never been part of society? How can you take someone that's never voted, never paid taxes, never attended school, never got a degree, never understood how to pay a mortgage, balance a budget, and you're going to tell me that you're going to take this person who's been completely dependent on the state, a legal means of slavery, by the way, in order to run their life? Unfortunately, this is the disinformation campaign that people have to deal with on a regular basis. The writings that I do and the music that I make deals with youth incarceration a lot. It deals with the ideology that people who are running around the street right now, they're not looking for fortune, ladies and gentlemen, because they know there's no fortune in the street. They're not looking for fame. They know there's no fame in the street either. They're looking for the most unlikely thing that you would ever think they would be, whether it's a gang member or a wild cowboy from the ghetto. They're not looking to be immortalized in a story. They're looking for love. And I'm going to say that again because it seems ridiculous for me to say, but it's the God's honest truth. Someone willing to fight 20 other people because they're wearing blue and he's wearing red, that's not out of the need to prove anything to anybody. There's no camera on. You're not in front of Hollywood. You're doing that because you love the brothers that you came up out of the dirt with. You're doing that because you love the people that you have around you, because you've grown in camaraderie with them. And all gangs, unfortunately, have a lost revolutionary past, because people from the days of old got together and said, well, let's talk about how America's really structured. You know, the difference between Black and Latino immigrants and the European immigrants that came has a stark difference. And why? It's because we've been fed this mythology that people from Italy or from Greece or from parts of Eastern Europe came here and just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Why can't y'all niggas do the same thing? How come you Latino people can't get it together? Well, here's the difference, ladies and gentlemen, that when people first came to the country in the early 1900s or before that, when illegal immigration first started in 1492, I think that it's important for us to note that a lot of people had not just applied for citizenship, but they also applied for whiteness. And that plays into the racism that the doctor was discussing before. In other words, if you did not apply for whiteness, you could not join a union, which is incredibly important, as we all know, for working class Americans to protect themselves and their job from a predatory employer. They weren't allowed to join the police department or the fire department. They weren't allowed to get loans from the bank, so they were locked into a red line district. So as you see, certain immigrants have a different experience than others. Also, for a long time, up until, I believe, the 1970s, CUNY was free. So there's another additive asset that people have had in their favor, that people have advantages they don't even understand. I think, obviously, we have to take a little time to use that wonderful Republican phrase, personal responsibility, and decide, what does it actually mean for us? Are we personally responsible not just to ourselves? We're also personally responsible for other people in the community. We're also personally responsible for the forces that govern that community. Not just for the people in the hood or the people in a well-to-do area. We're responsible for the police department that governs that area. I was on a panel discussion. I mean, I've done so many of them that I've grown accustomed to the I think someone called it mental masturbation. I don't know how many people you need until it's a mental circle jerk, but I think that at some point we have to acknowledge that there are so many different aspects and dimensions to this fight that just attacking it from one perspective will not work. And I'll use the example of colonization of people to show you how. Everyone has always told me since the civil rights generation, oh, we're going to fight against racism and classism. Some people think racism is the end-all be-all. Some people think classism facilitates racism. What is a broke racist? A powerless individual. What is a rich racist? The definition of racism, because they have control over your life. In other words, there's no such thing as reverse racism. It's just racism. The difference is that some people have power behind their racism and some people have no power. Some people have the power to make fun of someone who can't dance. Is that racist? Well, yes. Does it have any power? No. Someone says, hey, you can't have a job, and the difference is you have to justify that you're a human being. That's something that the other side of racism has never done. Yes, people have made fun of people for things that are ethnic stereotypes. But ask yourself, when I've experienced racism, did I ever have to justify my humanity to anybody? Did I ever have to look in the past of my life and say, hey, you know, I'm not 3/5 of a man. I'm not a mixture of a man and a monkey. I'm not an individual that mates with a person and we create a mulatto, which is a Latin term for a mule. What is the benefit of this term? It creates the idea that the European would exemplify the horse, the standard of being of a human being that actually eats better than a human, and the person of color would exemplify the donkey. The combination of these two creatures being the mule. The unholy alliance, they called it. What classical Hollywood cinema is based off the history of the tragic mulatto, that figure that nothing good can come of all this, of course, because the mule is born impotent. Now, why do I point all of this out? Why all of this history? To understand the foundation and the roots of how racism got involved into our society. Other people didn't need the excuse of racism to do what they needed to do. The early Greeks and Romans conquered so many people, whether it was the Scythians, whether they went to Judea. They didn't need to make excuses to the Hebrew people. Oh, you're lesser than us, your gods are less. No, we beat you. You're a slave. You'll get used to it. These are the new gods you'll worship now. We'll have a bunch of revolutions to work it out, and then you'll get used to the way things are. That was the way the caliphate operated. That was the way Greek states operated. That was the way Middle-aged Europe operated. It was only America that needed to make these excuses for racism. A scientific excuse, let us never forget. A religious excuse, never let us forget. Were all of these things that facilitated a sort of double standard of treatment within a justice system. Why? I'll get to that at the very end. But the point is that to facilitate a double standard of this justice system, you do something to a people that you normally wouldn't need to. In other words, if they had simply said, I took you because I had the power to do so, the way the Romans did, then there would have been not the cancer that we experience now. It was because they injected that lie that after slavery was then removed from the system, or at least relegated to an amendment of the Constitution that punished people with slavery for breaking a crime, they would have not been accompanied with all of the aftertaste of that. In the very beginning, you see the early Greeks and Romans did not have the cancer of racism that their ancestors would then absorb. They had African popes, African emperors of Rome. I think these things are ripped out of history because of La Reconquista, which is, of course, the Christian crusade in Spain, where they decided, no, we don't just want to get rid of dark people, we want to paint over the Christian saints. We want to get rid of all the Muslim people in Spain. We want to get rid of all the Jewish people in Spain. That's where the Alhambra decree comes in. And why? Why, ladies and gentlemen, all this? I'll explain it with a very simple metaphor that some of you will get, and maybe some of you that aren't into sci-fi won't get. There's a new movie for Star Wars coming out. How many people have ever seen Star Wars? Please raise your hand. All right. Some of y'all older heads love Star Wars. Is there nothing wrong with that? You can admit it. Come out the closet. You love Star Wars. No, I don't judge you. There's a second movie for Star Wars called The Empire Strikes Back, a fitting title. And towards the end of the movie, he says, we're going to put this guy into carbon freeze. And he goes, that could kill him. And he goes, all right, well then I want this machine tested on Captain Solo first. I don't want the Emperor's prize damaged. That's what they're doing now. They're testing the machine because you, ladies and gentlemen, the establishment of America, the middle class, the upper middle class, the lower upper class, you're the prize, ladies and gentlemen. Us, the people that are seen as less desirable by society, those individuals that people are used to seeing downtrodden, even those individuals that we find irreconcilable with our morality. For example, child molester. I've been to prison. Nobody has patience for that. Nobody has patience to sit there and let a person that had sex with children breathe in the next cell into them. So we created this thing that we look at as selective morality. And this is what allows us, and this is the cancer that you've been injected with as well. Because you say, well, fine, these people are murderers and they touch children as well. Let's take away whatever privileges they have in prison, never thinking that the next person could be you that they do this to. All these FEMA camps we hear people screaming about on TV. Oh, you're all going to be sent to a FEMA camp. You know what I mean? The guy seems to have an orgasm in his pants on Fox whenever they start screaming about FEMA camps. You know who's in those detention centers and camps? Immigrants. Why? Because in those people's minds, they think I don't belong there, but those people belong there. Criminals, immigrants, people who are powerless in society, poor people. I tell them we divide ourselves by race in prison, because that's true. But we're all united by class. Why? Because if any of us had that $10 million lawyer, we wouldn't be sitting there in prison. Which always begs the question from some cynic in the crowd, well, what happens, Technique, when you find a millionaire in prison? Well, then he's the guiltiest motherfucker in prison. Because he had a $10 million lawyer, and not even that guy could get him off. Use logic and reason, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have to pull the soul out of revolution. People are united by their ability to make money off this system. We're divided by petty differences between Sino-Soviet disputes we're still arguing about 40, 50, 60 years later. They got together and reconciled their differences and said, no, this is something we're going to call a government. But we all know it's a fraud because a government doesn't exist. It's just people that rule over other people. And they created a wonderful little system that will take their place when they die. Therefore, I don't have to teach my kid how to run this shit, because you've already been set up with the system in itself. The question is, what can we do about it? We talked about challenging things the moment we see them. Not just challenging things on the outside, but challenging things on the inside is how you change the world, ladies and gentlemen. And you start, of course, like the doctor said, with the people around you. Although I would say focus on your family first. You know, if I've learned anything, it's that individuals that are the closest to you are the people that we can't seem to reform. We have all these issues and we talk about the human rights of all these other countries in the world, and yet who are our biggest partners politically, militarily, wherever they are in the Middle East or in Latin America? These are the worst human rights abusers. We can't stop them from doing what they're doing. Why? Because we're helping them do what they do. Because we send our garbage there when it needs to be taken out. Because someone sends that person to a black site and you think, oh, fanatical Muslim terrorist, that's where he belongs. But you don't understand. He's in carbon freeze. He's waiting for you to stand there next to him. Because one day it'll be, you know what? You shouldn't speak against the system. You shouldn't have this sort of thought and idea. And every society has gone through it if you look very closely. The Romans went through it when their republic collapsed. There was a revolution intended years before, and Cicero had the conspirators killed without a trial. Open the door. Japanese imperial government, why did they go to war with America? Their military took over. They had a thing called the Toko, where they literally were a thought police. I know people are going for a criminal degree here. You want to reform the system. You want to do something about it. don't end up being thought police. We don't need thought police. We need people to police the police. Thank you very much.